I can dance and I can sing. I can do most anything. But just know it's not me. Just a pseudo image of who I think I should be. This is my...
All right, open the gates and jump right in. Forgot to open that ahead of time. Okay, I really wasn't gonna do one today. Because I was driving home and thinking, well, I don't really have anything to talk about. I didn't think about it ahead of time. And then when I got thinking about it, I got, well, I kind of maybe would want to talk about that. I think it might be helpful for some. When I first had the break in 2019, and I saw a picture of the truth, but the picture only pointed me towards an idea, it didn't take me to the end of the road. I still had to travel that road. I just had that picture now as sort of like a reference point of where I may be going. And that was seeing the guy that had used me and seeing it as abusive. And then seeing Joe, the boy I fell in love with when I was 15, and realizing that I had loved him. And those two things together showed me that my life was not possibly what I thought it was. So when I joined my online support group, I wasn't convinced that I was a victim of sexual abuse or sexual violence. I wasn't, because of that simple freaking concept of coping. I don't know if anybody really, who's never had to deal with an extreme emotional and confusing situation, understands how coping sort of causes a fissure, a detach, or what's the word I want? An incongruent sense of coherency. My 50-cent words I just pulled out of the bag. In our memory of a period of time. Because what happens when you start to have to cope, your mental, the visual mental, like surface ideas you have during that period are going to be one thing. They're going to be what you're telling yourself. What you're telling yourself is the truth. And then you're going to have your emotional, physical memory lines and experience that are going to tell you a different story. But while you're coping, you put a block on the emotional, and you focus on that mental, and you pretend, basically, that everything is just normal. And it's not until you go through the healing process that you start realizing that when you think of a period of time, you got two distinctly conflicted notions of what actually happened. And that's very weird, because the intensity of the memory of coping, or the prevalence of it, is it's like in your face. It's the emotional memory which lays in the background. Because quite simply, I have a memory of being in that time when I'm like going through it mentally, visually, as I'm looking at all the places I was and all the interactions, and even my interactions with him, the surface visual. I mean, I do have a couple visual moments where I was, they were, well, of course, in all the blurry memories of the bedroom. But generally speaking, my mind was convinced that everything was fine, because I had told myself during the whole thing that it was all my fault anyway. So who the hell wants to dwell in the feeling of that, you've screwed up your own life, you screwed up your own circumstance. So you just focus on that coping, the surface that, hey, everything was fine, whatever. And it actually took me being a part of my group before I realized fully that it wasn't what my surface memory was. And I started getting in touch with a lot of the feeling I had. It's funny, If you'd have said, well, who was he from the surface point of view, I would have said he was my roommate. This is what he looked like. These are the things we did together. I would have completely avoided the bedrooms, and that's what it would have been. I would have had this weighted feeling about him, but that's it. I had periodic dreams over the years of him. But when I started getting in touch with the emotional parts, when I started to allow myself to feel, I had one basic, it's like one coherent, unwavering feeling about him. Quite simply, it was I hated him. And when I look at the feeling, there is nothing else. Not a, well, this was all right, but no. It is one solid, coherent feeling of him. I hate him. And I believe that was the feeling I had about him from nearly the beginning. Because at first I just didn't really like him. And then, of course, when things started getting bad, I hated him. And then now that I know the part that he actually played and what he actually did, that just reinforces that hate. But the weird issue between the contrast, the conflict between the emotional memory and the surface memory of coping. Coping causes you to take a pattern or a part of a memory and trim it up and bend it a little and then tie it together with other bent up, and you're tying it together with blind connections, where you ignore anything else. So you got this strung together, bent up pieces of memory that are supposed to be the truth. And they fit in the moment that you created them. They fit with a purpose to gloss over, to allow you a sense of coherency in a difficult situation. But once the traumatic moments are done and over with, and you're left with the rest of your life, you are still carrying those strung together bent pieces as how you view and approach life. And instead of, and they will actually then shape your experience to fit those pieces. And you continue the sense of coping even though you have nothing to cope with anymore except for the after effect. Now, everybody experiences the notion of coping at some point or other. It's just that the experience wasn't strong enough to maintain the bent out of shapes of your perception and stuff. But when the experience is traumatic enough, meaning that you can't reshape and rebend those pieces back into a smooth place because the emotions that cause them to be bent out of shape are too difficult to deal with. But it's not entirely different than what other people experience. It's the nature of what you experience, not the function of coping. That's just a little bit that hopefully will help people who haven't dealt with have a better understanding. Because that's what I want to do with any of these things that I do, the After Midnights especially, is to help the people who have never experienced it understand better by trying to relate to the similarities of normal experience to what we go through, just with the understanding that it's the trauma that causes our normal functions to function abnormally. But I wish I had a wonderful final tag that leaves you thinking. But tonight, I think I'm just going to say, it's not after midnight, but it's getting closer. And I want you all to have a really good night.
Don't know how beautiful you are. Just know it's just not too
I
far. Welcome